I'm 78 years old, and the most painful truth I've learned is this. You can do everything right for 60 years and still end up wishing you had lived differently. I didn't realize that until it was already too late. I used to believe regret came from bad choices, from mistakes, from recklessness. I was wrong. My regret came from obedience, from patience, from always waiting for the right time. Let me tell you how that happens. Quietly, over a lifetime. When I was young, people loved to describe me as responsible. That word followed me everywhere. Responsible child, responsible student, responsible employee, responsible husband, responsible father. It sounded like a compliment. I wore it like armor. But armor, I've learned, doesn't just protect you. It also makes you rigid, heavy, slow to move when movement matters. I grew up in a house where doing things the right way mattered more than doing things the honest way. My parents were not cruel people. They were careful people. They had lived through years where money was never guaranteed and safety was always temporary. Scarcity shaped them long before it shaped me. Security was sacred in our home. They didn't talk much about dreams. They talked about survival, about steady work, about keeping your head down and not attracting attention. They taught me early that life wasn't about happiness. It was about stability, about not rocking the boat, about being grateful for what you had and not asking for more. I learned very quickly which parts of myself were welcome and which parts should stay quiet. Dreams were considered dangerous, risk was irresponsible, and wanting something different was quietly labeled selfish. No one said that word out loud. It was implied, in tone, in silence, in raised eyebrows. So I learned to wait. I learned that waiting was maturity, that patience was virtue, that obedience was character. I waited to speak my mind. I waited to follow what interested me. I waited to disappoint people later instead of now. That last one became a habit. Every time I felt a pull toward something uncertain, I told myself the same thing. Not yet. Someday. When things settle down. And the thing about someday is that it always sounds reasonable. It never sounds like cowardice. It sounds like wisdom, like planning, like responsibility. In school, I did well. Not because I loved learning, but because I loved approval. Teachers trusted me. Adults praised me. I became the child who didn't cause problems, and when you're rewarded for being easy, you start to disappear quietly. By the time I reached my late teens, I already knew how to ignore my own discomfort. I knew how to do what was expected. I knew how to delay questions that made other people uneasy. That skill followed me into adulthood. In my early 20s, something restless woke up inside me. Not loudly, not rebelliously, just a quiet itch that wouldn't go away. I had energy. I had curiosity. I had questions about the world and about myself. I would watch people pass through town with backpacks and accents and stories. They seemed lighter somehow, less certain, more alive. I wanted to travel, not vacations, not weekend trips, real travel, slow, uncomfortable, life-altering travel. I wanted to be anonymous somewhere, to struggle a little, to be lost. I wanted to learn who I was without familiar walls around me, without labels already attached to my name. But wanting something and choosing something are two very different things. Around that same time, I was offered a job, a good job, a safe one. It paid well enough. It came with respect. It made my parents proud. People congratulated me. Friends said I was doing the smart thing. No one ever asked if I was excited, so I told myself I'd travel later, after a few years, after I was more established. Later became never. What I didn't understand then was this. Some doors don't wait for confidence. They close quietly while you're being responsible. By my late 20s, The restlessness had softened into something duller, less urgent, easier to ignore. I told myself that meant I was growing up. I was building a life, a respectable one, and on the outside it looked exactly like it should. In my 30s, the feeling came back, stronger this time, more specific. I realized the work I was doing didn't fit me, not because it was hard, but because it was empty in a way that frightened me. It paid the bills, it earned respect, but it drained something inside me I didn't have words for yet. I would come home tired, not from effort, but from pretending I cared. I thought about changing careers. I thought about starting over. Those thoughts scared me more than failure ever did, because by then I had a family, a mortgage, people depending on me. Responsibility had weight now, real weight. The risks felt heavier. The consequences felt unfair to others. So I stayed. I told myself this was responsibility, that sacrifice was part of adulthood. I told myself everyone felt this way. What I didn't see was that I was slowly trading honesty for comfort, and comfort, when chosen too often, becomes a cage. By the time I reached my 40s, my life looked complete from the outside. There was a house, a routine, responsibilities stacked neatly on top of one another. People would say things like, "You're lucky. You've built something solid." And again, on paper, they were right. But something else had started to crack. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. My marriage didn't fall apart in arguments or betrayal. It faded in silence. We were good people. We showed up. We paid bills. We raised children. We did all the visible things that signaled success. What we didn't do was talk honestly anymore. Not because we didn't care, but because we were tired. Tired from work. Tired from routine. Tired from pretending that exhaustion was just a phase. Hard conversations require energy, and energy was the one thing we never seemed to have. So we postponed truth. We told ourselves we'd talk when things slowed down, when the kids were older, when work was less demanding, when life was calmer. But life never becomes calmer on its own. It just keeps asking more. I remember sitting across from her at the dinner table, hearing words, but not feeling connection. We were polite, efficient, strangers who shared a history. I wanted to fix it, not leave. Fix it. I wanted to admit how lonely I felt, how unseen. But loneliness felt like failure, and failure was something I had spent my whole life avoiding. Good enough felt safer than honest, so we learned to coexist. We called avoidance commitment. We called silence peace. We called endurance love. And for a long time, that worked. At least, it worked well enough to keep things moving. In my late 40s, I started feeling tired in a way sleep couldn't touch. My body still functioned. I showed up. I performed. But something inside me had slowed down. Not physically, spiritually. I would wake up already exhausted. Not because I hadn't rested, but because I hadn't been present for years. I thought about slowing my life, about choosing less, about saying no. But retirement felt far away, and expectations were heavy. People depended on me, not just financially, emotionally. I was the stable one, the reliable one, the responsible one. And when people depend on your steadiness, you become afraid to move. So I pushed through. I told myself this was temporary, that I just needed to get through this phase. Each decade had its own excuse. Each one sounded reasonable. Each one sounded mature. In my 50s, the waiting had become automatic. I didn't even feel the internal debate anymore. Delay had turned into instinct. I stayed busy. I stayed productive. I met expectations. People looked at my life and said, "You've done well." And I nodded. Because again, on paper it was true. I had a career people respected. I provided for my family. I showed up when I was supposed to. I avoided scandal. I avoided failure. I avoided risk. And without realizing it, I avoided myself. That's the part no one warns you about. Avoidance doesn't feel like loss while you're doing it. It feels like relief. Relief from discomfort. Relief from uncertainty. Relief from disappointing others. But relief has a hidden cost. It flattens life. Colors fade slowly. Joy becomes muted. Days blur together. You don't feel unhappy. You feel neutral. And neutrality is dangerous because it doesn't trigger alarms. It just quietly drains meaning. I learned how to live around that emptiness. I filled my schedule. I kept myself occupied. Silence made me uncomfortable. Stillness made thoughts surface, so I stayed moving. Looking back now, I see how carefully I avoided asking myself certain questions. Questions like, is this who I am? Is this how I want to spend my days? Is this all there is? Those questions felt indulgent, selfish. I had responsibilities. Dreams could wait. They always could, until they couldn't. There was one ordinary day that changed everything. No build-up, no warning, just a phone call, a voice on the other end telling me someone I loved was gone. Just like that. No more conversations, no more chances, no more later. I remember sitting down, not because I was crying, but because my legs wouldn't hold me. Shock doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it feels hollow, and in that hollow space, something terrifying happened. I didn't just grieve them. I grieved myself. I grieved the conversations I postponed, the truths I swallowed, the version of me I kept promising I'd become someday. I realized that someday had run out. That moment shattered the illusion I had lived inside for decades, the illusion that time was patient. Life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It never has. All those years I thought I was being careful. Life was passing anyway, and the realization wasn't loud. It was quiet, heavy, permanent. I started noticing time differently after that. Mornings felt shorter. Weeks passed faster. And regret didn't scream. It whispered. It whispered when I saw younger people rushing through their lives the same way I did. When I heard someone say, "I'll do it someday." I wanted to warn them, to shake them. But I knew they wouldn't listen yet, because I wouldn't have. That's another cruel truth. Wisdom arrives when it's no longer useful, unless you choose to pass it on. After that loss, life didn't suddenly become dramatic or poetic. It became quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet where there's nothing left to distract you from yourself. For the first time in decades, I wasn't rushing toward the next obligation. I wasn't managing someone else's expectations. I wasn't postponing truth. I was just here. And being here forced me to look back. At 60, I still told myself I had time. That thought stayed with me longer than it should have. Time felt familiar, like something I understood. But time changes when you stop making long-term promises. It becomes less generous. Days feel heavier. Years feel thinner. I began noticing how often my thoughts drifted backward instead of forward, not with nostalgia, with inventory. I replayed conversations I never had, paths I never took, moments I rushed through. And the strangest part was this. The regret wasn't about the things that went wrong. It was about the things that never happened at all. There were no vivid memories attached to them, just absences, empty spaces where choices should have been. I realized then that regret doesn't come from failing loudly. It comes from disappearing quietly, from shrinking yourself to fit expectations, from waiting so long that your own voice becomes unfamiliar. I had spent decades believing that stability was the same thing as safety. It isn't. Stability can keep you fed and sheltered, but it doesn't protect you from emptiness. I had built a life that looked solid and felt hollow. When I finally slowed down enough to feel that hollowness, I understood why I'd avoided stillness all those years. Stillness tells the truth, and the truth I had been avoiding was simple. I had lived my life according to permission. Permission from parents, from culture, from responsibility, from fear. I waited for the right time, for approval, for certainty. None of those things ever arrived, because life doesn't offer certainty. It offers moments, moments to speak, moments to choose, moments to act. And those moments don't pause. They pass quietly while you're being sensible. At 78, time feels different in a way I wish I had understood sooner. It's no longer an endless road. It's a room with walls. You can see where you've been. You can see where you are. And you can see, very clearly, where you'll never go. That clarity doesn't come with panic. It comes with stillness. Some mornings, I wake up and feel the weight of all the unlived days behind me. Not as guilt, not as fear, as understanding. Regret isn't loud. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It whispers when you sit alone longer than you expected to. When conversations become memories instead of possibilities. It whispers when you realize you became dependable before you became honest. I don't say this to condemn responsibility. Responsibility matters. But responsibility without self-honesty becomes a slow erasure. I erased myself carefully, politely, over decades. And no one stopped me because, from the outside, everything looked fine. That's another truth people don't talk about enough. You can live an admired life and still feel like a stranger to yourself. I avoided discomfort for decades. I told myself discomfort was dangerous. But discomfort was where growth lived, where truth lived, where intimacy lived. I thought playing it safe would protect me from pain. Instead, it protected me from depth, from intimacy, from self-respect, from knowing who I really was. And once you reach this age, knowing who you really were matters more than anything else. Because when the noise fades, identity is all you have left. I don't regret the nights I failed. I regret the mornings I didn't try. I don't regret the risks I took and lost. I regret the risks I rehearsed endlessly and never took at all. Failure teaches. Avoidance erodes. Failure leaves scars you can trace. Avoidance leaves nothing, just emptiness. If you're listening to this and you're younger than I am, I want to be very clear with you. You don't need a tragedy to wake up. You don't need to lose someone you love. You don't need to reach old age and look backward with questions you can no longer answer. But you do need honesty, not the kind you perform for others, the kind you practice alone. Ask yourself this, not casually. Seriously, what are you waiting for? And who taught you to wait? Was it fear disguised as wisdom? Approval disguised as love? Security disguised as virtue? Is it money? Stability? The perfect moment that never quite arrives? Because I promise you this. The years you spend waiting don't feel wasted while you're living them. They feel reasonable, responsible, normal. They only feel wasted when you look back. And one day, you will look back. That moment is inevitable, and when it comes, you'll either recognize yourself or you won't. Don't wait until regret becomes your teacher. It's a patient teacher, but a cruel one. Let discomfort guide you instead. Discomfort asks for courage now and rewards you with peace later. Speak sooner. Choose sooner. Live sooner. Not recklessly, honestly. Because doing everything right is meaningless if it costs you your life. So I'll ask you the question I wish someone had asked me. clearly, urgently, while I still had time to answer it differently. If nothing changes, if you keep waiting exactly as you are, will the person you are at 78 thank you for it?